It wasn't that long ago that I was presenting these kind of end-of-year videos in a suit and with a cane, and yet here I am in a cramped office and this whole side is full of boxes. You do not want to see that. And I feel like that's an allegory of sorts, since that year, the fancy year, was 2017, one of the best ever years for video games. What does that say about 2019 then? Not that I'm trying to completely devalue some of the wonderful games made by some of gaming's most talented individuals and companies this year, but you can usually get some kind of overview of the year by the time you reach the start of the next one. 2019 wasn't a complete write-off, as we'll come to find in this video, but with rising threats to the industry like microtransactions and the crazy hours that some developers work to crunch their games into existence, the spotlight is on good games more than ever to provide respite. Not justification though, that's just a bit too far. Honestly, I did enjoy a lot of the games that I played in 2019. It's not always easy to find the time to play new games when I'm running this channel full time, but it's satisfying that most of what I played gave me a fair amount of enjoyment and occasionally challenged my preconceived notions of what video games can be. Gaming is such a consumable driven hobby that it can be difficult to remember all of the specific highlights and lowlights, but 2019 had more than enough positive video gamey vibes to keep me going until the end. Still room for improvement though, which is why I'm hoping that 2020 is willing to step up to the plate. Be sure to reference that quote when 2020 turns into a complete shit show. You know what they say about hindsight. Looking back across the year as a whole, I think I ended up playing more indie games than AAA games. Not sure if it's likely to be reflected in this video in any significant way, but I distinctly remember moments during the year when a big studio would drop their highly anticipated video game and I'd shrug under my giant pile of quirky indies and carry on with something like Wargroove. I played this game at EGX in 2018 against a friend of mine, and even though he was much better at this Advance Wars spiritual successor, the defeats allowed me to slowly fall in love with Wargroove's style and character. I really like the defeat screen. I've wanted Advance Wars revived or rebooted for years now, and since Intelligent Systems are chin deep in Fire Emblem games right now, it was only ever going to come from an independent, unrelated studio. At their peak, the Advance Wars games were some of the best games on their respective systems, and while Wargroove has some way to go before being a quintessential component of the Switch's library, it is still a very faithful revival of some brilliantly tactical gaming with dozens of different units, some of which are dogs and are deeply special boys. I remember really pining for an Advance Wars remake a few years back and had practically given up hope just before Wargroove popped its head above the parapet, but with the way things are now, I couldn't be happier. I just wish I was good at it. Do you remember not so long ago when a rumour did the round that Nintendo were planning to release some kind of Zelda game every year on the Switch? There was mad panic everywhere, out of fear that Zelda would suddenly overnight turn into Call of Duty, that they'd hurry a game out every single year. But the critical thing is, if this rumour was true, they didn't say a new game on the Switch every year. Depending on how things go in 2020, our annual Zelda game this year could well be the sequel to Breath of the Wild that we know very little about. But even if it isn't, we might end up with some kind of remake or interesting take on the IP like we did last year. Cadence of Hyrule was a wonderfully refreshing take on Zelda that combined the best features from Crypt to the Necrodancer with the familiar Zelda aesthetic that sweetens the deal for the average consumer. But I didn't quite fall in love with it in the same way as I did with Nintendo's cutesy remake of Link's Awakening. If ever there was a game that perfectly suits an adorable art style that makes every object and character look like miniatures, it's probably Minish Cap, but if it's not, it'll be one of the most depressing Zelda games out there. The end of the world has never looked so charming. Not that everyone immediately took to what is admittedly a bit of a challenging art style to get used to, but dissenters were wrong when Wind Waker shaded all the cells, so it wasn't much of a shock when Link's Awakening greatly benefited from this more playful graphical style. It's also a great idea as a way of disarming the player to this game's darker tone that slowly creeps in as you progress through your adventure and completely engulfs the last third of the game. Strange Zelda game this, since it's forgotten amongst the sea of successful 3D titles, but most people who played the original or the Game Boy Color re-release would rank it very highly, and that is for a very important reason. It's relieving then that this new remake, under the guiding hand of Grezzo, who helped with previous Zelda games and only slightly altered some aspects too much that they're barely recognizable now, it's relieving that the soul of Link's Awakening hasn't been lost with a different physics engine, and in fact, it oozes charm all the way through. Or at least until things get depressing and I need to hold back all of my existential dread. My tones are all sorts of confused right now. Indie games are so good at providing a service that is otherwise lacking from other better funded corners of the industry. You only have to look at some of the incredibly talented people working on spiritual successors with a potent proclivity for staying faithful to a game formula that they didn't even make in the first place, to realize that large parts of this industry are in very safe hands. Mobius Digital, with their 11-man strong team, have only ever made 3 video games since they were founded in 2013. Not sure about Terra Chroma and Beacon 38 other than them being mobile games, but clearly Mobius was saving all of their creativity for Outer Wilds, a game where you're plopped into a solar system with no real knowledge of where you are exactly, tasked with working that shit out inside 22 real-life minutes before the local sun supernovas, and you're forced to reset at the location you started at. It's like Majora's Mask, but spacey. This is the perfect size and scope for an indie game. There's a set limit to this solar system and you can't explore it all in 22 minutes, so the cyclical time period is very necessary as you slowly piece together all the events that happen in that time and eventually navigate the world in the right way to discover the truth. It's an adventure game where the adventuring is in service of the story and the deeply engaging lore that it's trying to tell, and it feels like you're spending half an hour in a crime scene that's constantly shifting and changing during that time, with the world exploding at the end if you can't figure it all out. I love games like these that reward the effort you put in to explore every nook and cranny, and throwing in a time looping mechanic only sweetens the deal. We all want to explore space, but imagine if we only had a set amount of time to do so. I too would be fearful of inevitable supernovas. Puzzle games have gotten terrifyingly creative in the last decade. I remember seeing Braid in 2008 and thinking that time manipulation has to be as wild as it would get, but I also remember games like Fez and Ghost Trick, and Portal 2 was doing some insane things as a sequel to an already mind-bending foundation, and all I wondered when playing these games is, how the hell did someone think of this? My brain aches trying to solve these puzzles, so I can only imagine the thought process behind the creation of these games. That being said, Baba is You is surprisingly simple to understand from a conceptual standpoint. You is Baba, and you can use Baba to move word tiles that change the rules of each level. Simple to understand, but when you're doing the controlling and rule manipulation, fucking impossible. You know, in a good way. Puzzle games are probably the only genre where I'm okay with not really understanding what's going on. I like being able to understand the core concept, and then kind of leap halfway through the game to a later puzzle and realize that things get way more complicated and just so hard to understand. But that's the whole point. The challenge is like getting a grip on it, and that is not so easy in Baba Is You. Baba Is You fucked with me so hard. Puzzle games have rules that you have to remember as they start stacking up new features, and the challenge is seeing a level later in the game and working out what exactly you need to do from your arsenal of knowledge. Meanwhile, we've got this brainbuster where the entire premise is to change the rules on the fly, and when you can do that by simply pushing word boxes around until you're making criteria that can help you solve the level, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. It's nigh on impossible to describe to someone without showing them it happening in action, but I love that a game can leave me feeling so stupid. Then I start thinking way too hard about it and how this must reflect some coding in other video games and how some criteria must manipulate rules as well, and I decide then and there that I need a break. Baba must be confused too if he really is me. Hey, did you know that Masahiro Sakurai really likes Fire Emblem? Yeah, I know, you might have missed it, but during the last Smash Bros. Direct, there were a few subtle moments that hinted just how much Sakurai loves this franchise and how incredibly underrepresented it is in the Smash Bros. Roster. I think there was also a brief bit where he talked about how much fun he had with Fire Emblem Three Houses, which I felt was very relatable because I also had a lot of fun with the latest Fire Emblem game and the first main console title from that series in 12 years. It also capitalized on some of the best features from Awakening and Fates while working on others like better replay value and writing. This is a little surprising, because I remember there being very little hype leading into the release of Three Houses, and everything was pointing towards it having a limp release that didn't rake in enough sales and hobbled to an underwhelming sales figure. Turns out that everyone was wrong and stupid, and Three Houses is kind of incredible. Should have listened to Sakurai. Or rather, we should have looked at the last couple of Fire Emblem games, realised that they're pretty good despite a few faults, and understood that there was incredible potential here for an outstanding console game that draws ideas from Awakening and Fates with an added dose of refinement across the board to get the most out of the Switch's hardware. Not that Three Houses plays it safe or anything, since long-standing ideas like the weapon triangle have been virtually discarded, and permadeath has been de-emphasized as the quintessential choice, both of which you could maybe see as the continuation of the casualization of this historic franchise that fans would be concerned about for a while, but every addition and change made here feels like it clicks into place really well. Plus, the story's actually really good now, and we don't have the sort of contrivances that plagued Fates last time out. Isn't it fun when everything just kinda works in one of these games? Of course Byleth got into Smash Bros. Three Houses was basically Nintendo's best game last year. Seems like a fair reward to me. There was a time when I refused to include remakes in these end-of-year videos. Honestly, I'm not sure why, since it does take a lot of work and effort to successfully remake a game, and if there's a large enough window between the original's release and this new remake, you're presenting a greatly refurbished game to a new generation, an achievement that should be celebrated. Medieval got remade last year, as did Crash Team Racing, and I had a ton of fun with both of those, but I had few more entertaining experiences this year than with Capcom's remake of Resident Evil 2. You know, the mainline Resi game that everyone kinda forgets about since it doesn't have Nemesis or Wesker or Ashley Graham, but boy howdy, it definitely has this scary fucker, so maybe it deserves more respect? Or at least enough to make an incredible remake. Capcom have been killing it recently, and whereas the news of a Resi 2 remake would have worried me a few years ago, now I just sort of knew that this would be worth picking up. And hey, it's one of the pillars of video game horror given a new coat of paint and revamp for the 21st century. Of course I'm gonna be super interested in that. I'm in love with where Resident Evil has gone after Resi 6 was a huge letdown, and the Resident Evil 2 remake acts as both a great follow-up to Resident Evil 1's remake from a few years ago, and as a brilliantly executed update for the original game. This remake has been a long time coming, since there were originally plans to go around again with Resident Evil 2 at roughly the same time as Resi 4, but obviously Capcom were a bit too busy revolutionizing the entire industry. Nowadays, they've got enough time and manpower to drag Resi 2 into the modern day with a few new coats of paint, vastly improved cinematography and cutscenes, and a ton of quality of life improvements that may also include making Mr. X into an unstoppable force that hides around every corner and always catches me off guard. We've already seen that Capcom are remaking the third game, and for those of you who don't know, Nemesis is a faster version of Mr. X and you can't really hide from him. At least we have time to prepare. Mate, there were some strange games in 2019. We had the Text Assist, which for some reason combined bullet hell with a typing game. Sayonara Wild Hearts was extremely stylish and extremely confusing. And Travis Strikes Again was a lot to take in. None of these were all that bad, but Tetris 99 managed to bring together an absolutely insane idea with the kind of practical execution of this idea that kept me playing for months. I'm sorry, you can pluck ideas from inspirational sources until your brain collapses in on itself, but you're gonna struggle to top Tetris Battle Royale against 98 other people. In terms of natural progression of a video game, this is as good as it gets. The year was 2019 and I was somehow still playing Tetris, which is a positive endorsement of the longevity of Tetris, which will outlast us all, and also the potency of Tetris 99 as a concept. Not much has changed, it's not like they've added another block or anything, but going up against 98 other players online instantly makes everything a whole ton more hectic and requires you to learn a whole new set of tactics for targeting other players or defending against a horde of deadly laser beams, and it really does feel like this is where Tetris was heading for after all these years. It now has a new lease on life and a definitive way of playing it, since the idea of playing Tetris on my own and shooting for high scores or survival sounds depressing at this stage. I fear we've been slightly spoiled. This might just become a thing I do in videos now, but do you remember in the past when I've talked about selling a game on concept alone? Yeah, basically you don't need to talk about specific details because sometimes it is just a bit easier to outline what a game is like in order to ship a lot of copies. I brought this up recently when talking about Jump Force because that game sold a lot of copies despite being pretty terrible because its concept of basically being Anime Smash Bros is so strong. I'm bringing this up again now because ever since I saw a proof of concept trailer on Twitter from Untitled Goose game, I've been in love with every tiny detail in this game. You can talk about how much you were looking forward to Call of Duty in 2019 or the new Pokemon games, but me, it's all about that stupid goose. I feel like Untitled Goose game had a lot going for it because you're not likely to get this experience in most other video games, not just playing as a goose but playing as an arsehole. Because you got free reign to go around a village and just harass people the whole time. I'm sure it's in good faith. The slight issue with seeing lots of trailers in a game being sold on concept is that it can sometimes be a little hard to wrap your head around what it is exactly you'll be doing in Untitled Goose game, since it looked like it'd be a lot of stealing people's things and honking in their faces. That's not wrong, but I'm really glad this game has a structure to it that allows it to function like a problem-solving puzzle game and gets you thinking like a maniacal antisocial goose. Not only that, but the way Untitled Goose game builds towards its ending is surprisingly dramatic, and the final task you're given felt like a really satisfying culmination of the last couple of hours of goosing around this sleeping village. It'll be fascinating to monitor what developer House do next, since their only previous game before this was the mildly nightmarish Push Me Pull You, so whatever comes after the Goose game isn't likely to be a boring FPS or something. Maybe they'll finally give it a title. I really wasn't kidding when I said that Capcom are doing incredibly well at the moment. They still haven't started remaking Dino Crisis yet, so their reputation will be forever tainted until they rectify that. But in the meantime, they're remaking Resident Evil games and reviving Mega Man from the brink, and Monster Hunter has never been healthier. And I'm sitting here wondering what more they could be doing. I suppose if they really wanted to appease fans, then they could go down their catalogue of games and make sequels for games from popular franchises that they've neglected recently. That comes with a small note of caution, since Capcom have a bit of a history of rebooting franchises with a strange vision that long-time fans don't appreciate, and I did wonder how exactly Devil May Cry 5 was going to work in relation to the DMC reboot from a few years ago. Turns out, they'll just ignore it. That's what I would have done too. And holy shit, it's like the last 11 years didn't happen. Devil May Cry 5 has a ton of qualities and things to admire, but one of the most remarkable attributes it has is being able to pick up where the last game left off so seamlessly. It's like DMC has never been away, and that we've all been living in some kind of unusual parallel universe where Capcom spent too long breathing out of their assholes to continue one of their flagship franchises. In 2019, Devil May Cry is back to its absolute best with deeply rewarding combat that encourages the player to get creative and really learn the differences between the three playable characters. V plays unlike anything seen in the Devil May Cry game before, so there's that to sink your teeth into, but you've still got Nero being the perfect intro for new players and Daddy Dante the advanced option for styling all over the place, and I'm really happy that Devil May Cry is back. If Capcom can't give us Dino Crisis just yet, I'm happy to settle for more Devil May Cry games. Or Mega Man X if you're feeling crazy. I'll try to keep my expectations low. I don't want to brag too much, but cross-referencing this video with last year's video about my most anticipated games of 2019 makes for some fascinating viewing. For a start, you get two different levels of optimism of a year's worth of playing games that have to meet a lot of expectation in between, but it's kind of interesting seeing me effectively predict my favourite games of that coming year. It's doubly interesting when the game I'm most excited for actually comes through as the best game I played in 2019. To be fair, when that choice is Sekiro, there's a good chance that Samurai Dark Souls was going to be one of the highlights of the year. Don't need to be a genius to work that one out. Comparing Sekiro to Dark Souls is a bit inaccurate, since elements like character creation and leveling up your stats are absent in favour of a grappling hook and a more aggressive style of combat. Plus, you can resurrect yourself on the spot after dying, and now you've got fleshed out stealth mechanics, so Sekiro does plenty to distinguish itself as a uniquely challenging string to From Software's bow. Definitely challenging. I did have a few concerns that this new IP would dumb things down to separate itself from Dark Souls, but fucking hell, I'm still bad at these games. That says more than I ever could, that I died hundreds of times and took an age to beat the first boss, and yet Sekiro was the best game I played all year. From Software are some talented fuckers. This is RabbidLuigi, and it's weird to think that From Software had a huge library of video games under their name even before Demon's Souls came along. You know, they made some kind of mecha game and lots of RPGs, but it's their Soulsborne games that is what is in the public perception these days. So it's good to know that they can approach a new IP and without a massive attachment to Dark Souls, and they can still make a lot of money and get a lot of recognition for it. In the next one, could you like set it in space and so we can fuck around with gravity the whole time? You know you want to.